those who can't do.
Teach.
Hi, I'm Scott Selecta, director of Fairfield High School Drama Club's production of Brigadoon. We're on stage here with the cast. We have with us a guest speaker today, Dr. Terry Cochran, who will talk about his outfit, and he's going to talk about bagpipes, do some playing for us. So we thank you for filming us, and we hope you enjoy our program.
Thank you. How many of you are actually going to be wearing the kilt during the program? I want to tell you right now, it is an extreme honor to wear the kilt. If you've ever been in Scotland and seen the men of Scotland, there is no greater honor than being able to wear the kilt. There is nothing to be self-conscious about. If anything, if you're not wearing the kilt, that's the time to be self-conscious. When Sarah and I went over to Scotland about 6 years ago, when we arrived at our hotel, we arrived just as they were getting ready for a wedding reception. All the gentlemen were dressed very similar to the way I am right now, and you couldn't have believed how proud this group of people were. All of them wearing their own specific tartan, and this group of people invited the guests of the hotel that we were at to actually participate in the reception. A very friendly group. During the scenes that you'll be doing in Brigadoon, in particular the wedding scenes, you really should have a sense of community and participation, and that everyone is part of it and there to really enjoy each other's company. If you can get that spirit, then you will have Scotland and Brigadoon down well. Okay. So, let's go over what I'm actually wearing. Since we're inside, I don't have this on. This is called a Balmoral. This is more of a civilian type of hat, and it's 100% wool, and it's only proper to wear one of these if you actually have a clan crest badge on this. This particular one is a Robertson. My grandmother was a Robertson. That entitles me to be able to wear this. The Scots were very educated people, and the motto is in Latin. It's Virtutis Gloria Mercedes, and it literally means that honor or glory is your reward for virtue. And the Cochran one is virtue and labor, which means virtue and hard work is how you succeed in life. So very practical mottos. Now, let's start with the shoes. They don't have any tongues. This type of shoe is considered to be both appropriate for day wear and the most formal occasion you could imagine. If the Queen was coming to Scotland, this would be appropriate to wear with the Queen. These are called Ghillie brogues, which literally means men's shoes. The lore and the reason there's no tongue is that walking across the streams and fields in Scotland, it was so wet that the tongues, if they were in there, would tend to hold water in, and that your natural action of walking with the tongues out would get any water out of your shoes. That's the theory behind it. The hose that I have on, this is a formal hose. For a formal occasion, the only thing that's proper is white or an argyle pattern that must match the tartan you're wearing. For other occasions, any other color that is solid and would match your kilt would be appropriate. For Brigadoon, since it takes place 200 years ago in terms of time, I will be wearing an off-white and not quite as formal for that. Now let's get to the kilt pin. This was not something that was a traditional. Queen Victoria, who really was the one that revived interest in Scottish attire and really allowed Scotland to go back to having full tartan and no restrictions. Well, it was the Victorian age. She liked the kilt, she liked everything else, but she thought that without a pin there, it was a little too risque. Now, anyone who wears a kilt knows that you don't actually put it through the next layer because it changes the way the kilt hangs and it doesn't look good. So it's literally just symbolic. It doesn't do anything. This is a Sporran. It's the Middle Ages fanny pack. In it I have my car keys, my contact case, because obviously there's no pockets on a kilt, so you had to have some place to keep things, and that's what this is. Now this is a formal sporran. A formal sporran would be like this, with fur, usually decoration. There is another type of formal sporran that seems a little odd now, but is still considered to be proper attire at any occasion, and that's one that's made out of fur, and instead of all this decoration here, it still has the animal's head on. One of the most popular and most formal is actually considered a skunk sporran. Obviously, they've gotten rid of the smell. Okay. Now the kilt. This is Cochran tartan, and for someone my size, it takes 8 yards of 16-ounce wool to make a kilt. So you're starting with 8 pounds right there in the kilt. The reason so much is each of these are an incredibly deep pleat so that the pattern stays consistent no matter what. This is a modern kilt. The ancient kilt, which you see in Braveheart, or called the Great Kilt, is just basically one large piece of cloth that doesn't have all the pleats in it. And you lay down, you take a belt it on, and then you start wrapping until you've got everything covered and put it over your shoulder. In those times, when you're ready to go to sleep, you take off your kilt and wrap yourself up in it, and it was your bedroll too. Going into battle, most of them did not wear their kilts into battle like you see on Braveheart. You've got all this stuff getting in the way. They actually had long shirts that they tied between their legs, took their kilts off, and had less to get in the way when they were in battle. Okay? Now, this is a Prince Charlie coat and vest. It's considered the more formal attire, and this is proper evening attire. A normal tweed coat, like any of you might wear, is considered proper day attire. The only difference between one that you might wear and one that I would wear with this is it's much shorter. Where the last button would be on a tweed coat for the United States is actually where the coat gets cut off. And they obviously like to put lots of decoration. Just about any Scottish coat will have these so that you can drape stuff through them and not have to worry about it falling over your shoulder. Now, this is a separate piece of material and is called a plaid. It's spelled just like plaid, but it's called a plaid. You have to distinguish between the two. And they're basically 3 different types. I have on what's called a drummer's plaid. It is tied back in the waist and then comes up over, and it's about 4 yards of cloth. Again, 16 ounce, so we're now up to 12 pounds just with tartan. Okay. The fly plaid, which is what most of the ones they've been trying to make for you, it's usually 1 to 1.5 yards of cloth, just attaches here and drapes straight down, no attachment below. A piper's plaid is even more cloth than what I have on. It doesn't attach at the waist. You bring it down, you wrap it around, and it's finally all tied together. It's the most cumbersome one, and you don't see it very often just because of that. Now, obviously I have a tuxedo shirt on today because this is a formal attire. There are other types of shirts. Again, this is from a country that was part of the Victorian age, so there are very frilly type of shirts that you can wear with this. For Brigadoon, because it is taking place in more ancient times, I will have a different sporran, one that is mostly leather with a tiny bit of fur on it, and instead of this elaborate jacket, I will have what's called a Jacobite shirt. I'll still wear this. Now, Jacobite refers to the revolution that was led by Bonnie Prince Charlie, the last attempt to get England out of Scotland, and there are lots of stories about it, and it's really very interesting reading. And the story behind this is when Bonnie Prince Charlie was finally defeated, he spent about a year hiding in the Highlands And it was basically through the help of women in the Highlands dressing him up however they could to get him out and back to France. There's a lot of poetry about it, a lot of love stories, just a very interesting time. Okay. Now, my brooch here. I don't know if you can see this very well, but that is a thistle in the middle of it. Around here in Iowa, we kill thistles. Over there, they put them on roadsides. And it's actually considered a national symbol. The reason for it is Scotland was in a place where it was very easy for people to try to invade it. No one ever conquered it, but a lot of people tried to invade it. And the story is that one group of invaders came across a thistle field while trying to sneak up, and unfortunately for them, they were no longer quiet after stepping on some thistles and were routed. So to this day, one of the symbols of the monarchy of Scotland is a thistle. So, very dramatic difference in perception from what we have here. Okay. Now, there are a number of sources of things for information, and this is the best source. And I'll leave this with Mr. Selecta for a while. It's So You're Going to Wear the Kilt, and it answers every question you've ever had about kilts, including the proper attire, what to wear when, what not to wear, what mistakes people make, and even how to make some of your own stuff, okay? I'm going to pass around one of the Cochran badges, so you're welcome to look at that if you'd like. Before I go on, does anyone have any question about the attire itself? Yes?
What are the little red things?
Little red things basically allow the hose to be held up. Have to remember, this is wool, no lycra. They don't stay up unless you have something like that. And the thing that I forgot to mention, I'm glad this is what's called a Sgian-Dubh, literally black knife. In more ancient times, when a Scotsman would go into someone's house, and you were expected to put all your weapons at the door. It was a friendly house. And even to take out your concealed weapon, a dagger. Now, you weren't expected to put the dagger by all of those, because who knows when a household might be attacked by someone who's unfriendly. So what you did is you took it out and you put it in the hose on the side. If you're right-handed, on the right side, if you're left-handed, on the left. That way you showed your host that you meant no harm to them, but also that you were prepared in case there was something that came up. And in modern times, because it is a knife and there's concern about weapons and things like that, this has been banned in certain areas, and it's such a tradition among Highland regiments that some of the guards in England have all tattooed Sgian-Dubhs right there because they aren't allowed to wear a Sgian-Dubh in public. They feel that strongly about the tradition. Okay. Any other questions? Surely there's got to be some more questions about this. Yes, ma'am.
What are the things that they keep in their
Sporran.
Sporran, yeah.
Just think of it as a fanny pack, so it would be whatever you would have at that time. If you were going out fishing, for instance, or something like that, you'd keep certain things there. If you're going on a hike, you may even keep your lunch in there. This is a very formal one, very small. For day wear, a lot of them will have big leather pouches, can hold a lot of stuff. But if you just think of what practical items you'd need, that's what goes in there. Yes?
I know dancing guys who wear kilts, they wear like the dance pants or whatever, sort of like cheerleaders do. So it like doesn't matter if it shows. But so what did they wear under there in ancient times?
All right. It's answered in the book, but I'll also give you the modern answer. Number one, it's improper for me to say what I'm wearing under mine, because that would be against the mystery of it. But in terms of what is proper, you're absolutely right. For dancing and for marching, the Queen's Scots Guard, for instance, it's proper that they can and are expected to wear something underneath. Now, for the regular foot soldiers that wear kilts in England and Scotland, they are considered out of uniform, non-regimental, if they have anything on under their kilt. Having said that, most of them have long shirts that they tie. Okay. Yes?
Does each family have their own type of plaid?
Almost every family will have its own pattern. If there isn't a set pattern in your name, you would probably be allied with, say, the Campbells or someone else and be allowed to wear that particular plaid. I just happen to have one of my own, but Campbell's, for instance, there's like 30 or 40 names associated with Campbell, and each of those would be entitled to wear the Campbell. And when I say entitled, in the United States you can wear any of this stuff and it's not a big deal. But when you talk about in Scotland and who should wear what, it is a big deal because it is considered as a grant from the clan chief. Yes?
So in Scotland today, day to day, do men usually wear kilts or do they wear pants?
For most occasions, they wear pants. You will every day see someone in kilt. When it comes to formal occasions, to Highland games, to just events where people are being seen, you will see people in the kilts because, you know, if you're going to be seen, you want to be seen at your best, and in your kilt is at your best. Yes?
Do people actually recognize the kilt and know, oh, he must be and then your last name?
Believe it or not, yes. Having said that, there's about 1,000 or so different tartans, so obviously not everyone recognizes them. But here in the United States, I'm sure all of you have seen Royal Stuart plaid, Dress Stuart, Black Watch. You get all of those things in Land's End and Eddie Bauer. Okay. They don't label them as that, but that's what they are. So it is part of our culture. Yes? Why the bow tie? Because it's a formal attire. If I was wearing my day wear jacket instead of a bow tie, I would have just a plain tie. Yes?
And the belt part of the outfit?
Yes.
Are there different kinds of belts like there are?
The belts are pretty much the same. The only difference is what you put on the belt. Mine is just a Celtic design belt, and the correct pronunciation is Celtic. It's spelled just like Boston Celtics, but Celtic is the correct pronunciation. I read one source where they said that the only time you should ever say Celtic is if you're talking about the basketball team. Yes?
Did you get all of that in Scotland?
Most of my attire has been imported from Scotland. Very little of it did I get when I was over there. My interest just grew more and more as I came back. Some of the attire, the jacket for instance, all the materials were imported, and one of the suppliers I used tailors them in the United States to get the right fit for people. Yes?
Is it only the Scottish that wear like kilts or plaids? Or?
No, the Irish do. And as a matter of fact, St. Patrick's Day parades, you will see a lot of pipers, kilts, and the whole bit. Yes?
So like, they wouldn't get offended if just anyone wore a kilt?
No. They'd only get offended if you did two things. One, you called it a costume. It's not a costume, it's proper attire. And two, if you're embarrassed to be wearing it. Wear it with pride. Yes?
Is there a big difference between the Scottish people and the Irish people?
There are differences. Having said that, there's a long tradition of the Scots and the Irish going back and forth depending on who is in power. For instance, the history of the Cochrans is that there have been Cochrans in Scotland and then Ireland, back and forth, and then the Cochrans that made it to the States, some came from Ireland, some came from Scotland, but they all came from the same source. And even the name of Scotland, a tribe of individuals from Ireland called Scots were the ones that went into Scotland, joined the groups that were there, and eventually led to the name of Scotland. There are distinct differences just based on government and stuff like that, but if you actually look at genealogy and where people came from, very closely tied. You can see Northern Ireland from Scotland. Yes?
Would you have like different qualities of skirts? Would you have like one for everyday and one for formal?
This kilt is considered to be acceptable for everything from the most formal occasion to throwing the stones at a Highland game to tug-of-war. A kilt is all-purpose. Where it becomes dressed down or formal is what you put with it. Obviously, if you're going to do all that, you probably want more than one kilt. Yes?
Do they get offended if you call them skirts, and are they really expensive? That's all.
You will be corrected in terms of what the proper name is. A kilt is attire that is considered only proper for men or women who are in a pipe band, and it is not a skirt. And there are some subtle differences, but a true Scot will inform you of all of them, one of which a kilt is always on the right. Female attire will always be on the left. So they will let you know, yes. It is not a skirt, it is a kilt. Yes? Well, certainly it had some influence in terms of bringing the clans together. Initially, the clans were just groups of families, each had their own area, and there was not much in the way of central government. The invasions, whether they were from the Danes or from the English, prompted the landowners to join together, and that's how there became a united Scotland. Most of the nobles in Scotland, about the time of Wallace, for instance, some of those were landed both in England and in Scotland. So when you talk about the nobility, there was definitely a blurring there. But in terms of the individual people, there was a difference primarily because of the Gaelic language. The Gaelic language was still quite common up until the 1700s or so. And the one thing that was done to try and cut down on Scottish unity and pride, which backfired, was banning the kilt, the bagpipes, and saying it could happen no more. Well, as they found out, people would take swatches to church, the priests would still bless them, and that was the only place that the clansmen could gather. So they literally found a way of getting people banded together and adding religion to their zeal, so it backfired. Eventually they figured it out and let Scottish regiments wear the kilt, play the pipes, and actually go into battle for Great Britain. Yes?
Is there attire for every Scottish clan? Or there's some that don't have it?
There are some that do not have their own tartans. For those, there are national tartans. So there's a tartan that anyone could wear. Yes?
Typical female attire.
Typical female attire, number one, it's got to be below the knees. And it can be the same amount, and it's usually this length, be very formal. Shoes, usually there would be a sash that would come around, and if you didn't want that, the other thing that's considered proper is the same black evening wear that we have here, but having some sort of tartan accessory. So you'll see like a fly plaid or something like plaid, excuse me, yes.
Would the women wear their plaid then draped in front?
Yes.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, I think I brought an extra catalog I have of how that's done, so you're welcome to keep that And as a matter of fact, the plaid that's on the front of that is called the Pride of Scotland, and that's one that would be appropriate for anyone to wear. Any other questions about this before I get to the bagpipes? Yes?
In dancing, the girls wear kilts, right, too, but do they have to be, is there a certain way they have to be for it to be acceptable? You said that, like, girls aren't supposed to wear them.
It has to do with whether or not it's a uniform or not, okay? So when you're talking about dancing, piping, drums, whatever, then it's considered appropriate, okay? But if it's not a uniform, then it's not considered appropriate. Yes?
They make the material for the kilts. They stitch it. How long will it take to make it?
It takes a long, long time. The material itself, each of the plaids is registered, so Cochran always has this particular pattern, and when I ordered this, it took roughly 4 weeks for them to just do a special order run to get this plaid done, and then there was a making after that. The making itself can take quite some time. Obviously, if you have someone that does nothing but make kilts, they get very good at all the pressing and tailoring and stuff like that, and are able to turn it out much quicker. Okay. Well, why don't I get to the bagpipes? And the bagpipes, and I have mine here, it's a wind instrument, one of the oldest. There have been bagpipes from the Middle East. There are bagpipes in France, Sweden, Ireland, all over the world. But the Great Highland Bagpipe is the one that people think of when they hear the term bagpipes. You're actually blowing 4 different reeds all at once. So you're blowing 4 separate wind instruments. And I've got some natural reeds here. These are the drone reeds, which are the large tubes, and it's just a hollow reed that's been cut. And most pipers these days don't use these because it's very hard to keep them in tune, and they wear out quickly. But this is the traditional product, and it's the natural product in the marshes. The important reed, the chanter reed, is a double reed, similar to the oboe. And I'll pass this around. There you go. And you will not see people use plastic or other things when they talk about their performance instrument, their pipes. For the practice pipe, which is what I'll show you first, you will use plastic because this is what you spend all your hours on, and there's very little room to trap moisture, and you'd wear out reeds very quickly. There are 9 basic notes that you have on this, not a lot of notes, so the way they make up for it is lots and lots of grace notes and different fingering. And in this case, a reed right here. Okay. And a practice pipe sounds like a recorder. It doesn't sound like much, but you're able to blow some notes. And if you blow too hard with this, it'll just stop. The whole idea of this is to just get your practicing, get your fingering down, because you can practice on this for an hour or 2 after you're accustomed, and you'll still have a lip, still be able to talk, and still be able to do something. When you're on the pipes, you can't go that long at all. You're blowing 40 pounds per square inch, and in piping competition, where you have world-class pipers, it's considered to be a long tune and very difficult if they're playing 6 to 7 minutes. So it's a lot of effort. The really great pipers make it sound nice and they look like it's not much effort, but I can tell you it's a lot of effort, and that's part of their skill, is that they're able to make it look easy. Let's go over some of the parts here. This is the chanter. Traditionally, this would have ivory. Obviously, we don't use ivory anymore because of the restrictions. And the various holes. The reed that I showed you is right in here. It is attached to an elk hide bag. This elk hide bag is stitched very tightly, and you use basically anticoagulants. All sorts of things have been used because you have to try to stop up every hole in there. You don't want to waste any air that you get into the pipes. This tube is the blowpipe. In this, you blow into the bag, and there's a little leather valve in here that drops down and closes off when you take a breath. If it didn't close off, the air would rush right back out and the sound would stop. That's the thing about bagpipes, is it's different than other instruments, is that you're not stopping in between notes. The only way you get from one note to another is to change notes. It's a continuous sound. And then the three other tubes are the drone tubes. This is the one with the large reed that I showed you, and these two are smaller reeds. These two are tuned to 1 octave below the low A on this one, and this is tuned an octave lower. How do you tune them? These are slides. Slide up and down, and so you can adjust your tune. Now, the hard part about this is, depending on the weather, depending on how long you've been playing, whatever, they will go out of tune quickly. And one of the things that pipe bands are judged on is everyone being in tune and able to adjust and stay in tune as they go through a competition. Now, you have to have this, the cord, and a lot of them will have decorations and banners and things like that. If you didn't, your pipes would be falling all over the place. You'd be thinking about your pipes and you wouldn't even be able to play. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the pipes before I make some loud noises? A bagpipe like this would cost around $950. And believe it or not, that's fairly low on the price range. When you're talking about bagpipes, once you get a set that's built well like this, the only difference then is the frills that are put on it. Some people will put sterling silver mounts, others buy older pipes that have ivory mounts and things like that and get engraving. If you do that for the same quality sound, you could spend $3,000–4,000 easily. Yes?
Where'd you learn how to pipe?
Most of it was through books and things. I haven't been piping all that long. I'm fortunate that we have Robbie Stinson, who lives in the Dowds area and has been active in this community. He's been piping for many, many years, and about once a week we get together to go over tunes and give me some advice. Yes?
I noticed that the plaid on your bagpipes didn't match your tartan.
That's correct.
So if you were in an actual
If I was,
contest, would it matter that they didn't match?
if I was in a contest, everyone in the, if it was a pipe band, everyone would have the same, and I would probably have a black velveteen or something like that. Again, for individual, it doesn't matter that much because they don't technically grade an individual on what your bag looks like, but you'd still have one that either matched or was a compliment. Yes?
Does it take a lot of breast support to play?
Yes, it does. My weight's the same as it was 9 months ago when I started, and my chest size has increased by 2 inches. Yes?
What got you interested? When did you start playing?
The reason I got interested, again, has to do with Robbie Stinson and some of the traveling I did. Robbie has put on a production at our local church each year where the pipes were played, people came in their tartans, and reenacted the kirking of the tartans, the bringing the tartans in and having them blessed, like they were in times where they were banned. Robbie is retired, and it's a tradition I wanted to see continue for many, many years, and I thought the only way that I could ensure that that happened was to try to play the bagpipes.
And how much do lessons cost?
I haven't paid anything for lessons yet, so the hard part is finding someone that you could actually take lessons from. There are sources where you can go in the summer to piping school. For instance, this summer I'm spending a week at Prince Edward Island in Canada. They have College of Piping there, and so that will be my first real formal education on piping. Yes?
What kind of place spells there?
This is where modern technology comes in. There's no place here. I get on the internet, and you can find it pretty easily. This set came from Scotland, but it was actually purchased through a place in Kansas City. While we're mentioning the internet, there are a lot of neat websites if you're interested in this type of stuff. www.bagpiper.com, www.tartantown.com, www.electricscotland.com, and piping.tico.com. Those are all sites that I use. They've got scads of information, links to anything that you would ever want to know, either about Scotland, tartans, bagpipes. You can get all that information there. Yes?
Have you heard of him?
Yes.
He said he was doing lessons.
Yeah. He's very experienced. His primary interest, if you've been reading the papers, is he builds and plays the Irish pipes, which are a bellow-driven pipe. They have 2 octaves instead of 1. And yes, he's world-class. He's been doing it for a long time. I'm more of an enthusiast as opposed to an avid musician. It was actually 25 years from the last time I'd picked up an instrument to the time I started on the pipes. Yes?
Does that practice one come with it, or do you have to buy them?
You have to buy them separate. And quite frankly, you buy the practice one first to see if you can learn the notes and stuff before you make an investment like this. Any other questions? If not, what I'll do is I'll play a couple tunes here, and then I'm sure there'll be some questions after you've seen playing, okay? I'm going to give this to someone. I don't think anyone would appreciate me blowing directly into this. That was Bluebells of Scotland. Does anyone have any questions about this?
There's that constant, like, one hum. What's that from?
Those are the drones. And if everything's in tune properly, you're right, it should be one constant hum you hear and not So they are pretty close today. you notice that on each of these songs, the sound never, ever stopped. The only way that that can be done is when I'm taking a breath, I have to put enough pressure on the bag to keep the amount of pressure necessary to keep the reeds blowing properly. And that's not an easy thing to learn. When you first start out, you get lots of wavering of sound, but after a while you get used to it. Yes?
Does it take a lot of coordination to play the bagpipes?
The short answer to that is yes. The long answer is it's a coordination that can be learned. Yeah.
What exactly do you have to do when you're getting it like all started and there's those weird bad noises?
Okay. What happens, and when you start up playing, you fill up the bag with enough air, and then you increase the pressure, and the drones should be the first thing that come in. And if you listen to a piping tape, you'll notice there's usually a drum roll, then you hear the drones kick in, and then finally the tune is started. And a pipe band, it's a very set regimen how people do this. You'll also notice that at the end, when you're done with the tune, you're trying to get all of them to stop at the same time. If I had the bag completely filled up and just stopped, this would stop first and then the drums would squawk and squeak, and it's not a very good ending. So that's one of the things you try to practice, so it should be as crisp an ending as you can get. Not always easy when you're completely out of wind and just trying to get to the end of the song. Yes?
You have to clean it?
Yes. Maintenance of bagpipes, there's various oils that you use, and I've got several cleaners, and at least once a year you should completely take apart your bagpipes and oil all the wood. The reeds require lots of maintenance. The longest I've ever had a chanter reed last is 2 months. So I'm constantly having to tweak those, sand them, blow in a new reed, which does take a while. Think you have a good reed, you finally get it in shape a week later and you notice the sound's not right and you have to go through it all over again. And each of these joints has little hemp string, and that's what holds it in place, and as you blow it absorbs moisture and makes it a tighter seal. That has to be periodically replaced too. The other thing is, that I haven't mentioned, is the only way that you can adjust to have the proper pitch on this is that reed that you put in, you have to adjust how far it goes in. That's the only way you can adjust the pitch. So there isn't any slide tuning or anything like that. You just have to get it right. You keep adjusting, putting more string or taking off string and putting it back in until you do.
Is that double reed in the mouthpiece or the thing you put your hand on?
The double reed is actually, if you open this up right here. And just so you see, it really is a hide bag. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Is there some sort of spit valve, or does that go out the long thing?
The conditioning agent that you put in here, it actually will absorb moisture, and as it absorbs moisture, it actually forms a better seal on the bag. So as long as you haven't played to completely overwhelm that mechanism, you don't have a problem. For some of the professional pipers that pipe a lot, they will put a water trap in places. The only problem with those is you have to take parts apart and dump out the water every so often. For my practice chanter, I do have a water trap in it. Yes.
I didn't really see you. Did you have to be squeezing on the bag with your elbow, and what exactly did that do?
Squeezing on the bag allows you to maintain the constant pressure you need, especially when you're taking a breath. when I'm taking a breath, the only thing that keeps pressure going to the reeds is my arm. And you have to maintain that constant pressure, so when I'm blowing air back into it, I can't just let my arm up. I have to let the force of my air not only blow the reeds, but push my arm back out to where it needs to be, and then come back down again. So at least my technique is I try to maintain the same arm pressure all the time. Whether it's coming in or going out is dependent on whether or not I'm taking breath.
Do you have to breathe a whole bunch?
Yes. You're keeping 4 reeds going all at once. It requires a lot of wind. Yes?
Does it differ from the practice one very much? Is it really hard to switch back and forth?
It's not hard to switch back and forth after you've got the breathing technique down for this and the bag. Because on the practice, you just blow as long as you can, then you take a breath, and then you go again. And after a while, you're probably just as winded on the practice chanter as you are on this, because you eventually get to the point where you're trying to blow at least halfway through the song before you take a breath, because you want to get the transitions as best as you can, and each time you take a breath, you're not doing a transition you should.
How many songs do you know?
I've memorized 9 songs, and of those 9, there are 6 that I can do fairly well. There's another 10 that I don't have memorized, but I can play fairly well reading sheet music. Eventually, any that I play, I have to memorize, because you don't see many pipers standing in front of the music stand. If anything, they're marching or walking around when they play. Yes?
I don't know if you noticed or not, but there's an instrument that represents the bagpipe. It's all on rivet ends and also on a Tartan. I wonder if you knew what that was.
That where they were sitting down, or
Yeah.
that's the Irish pipes, or Gillian pipes. There are a number of pronunciations, and the difference in that is it's got a bag, it's got this. Instead of all these drones, it's got what are called regulators, the tubes that go down to the side, and you have bellows under this arm that you're pumping to fill the bag. This arm is maintaining the pressure that you need to, and you've got a wrist that's changing a valve so that you have 2 octaves instead of 1. And obviously to do all that you have to sit down, because there's no way you can do it any other way. Any other questions about it?
Are all the songs just so short because it's hard to keep playing a long time?
Most songs are pretty short. In competition or performance, when I practice, I usually play 2 or 3 songs together. There is the traditional style of Scottish music called pibroch, and those tunes, by the time you go through every variation, you may play for 6 to 10 minutes. Pibroch is something that only the really accomplished pipers play well. Interesting thing about that, you don't have the measures and things like you do in traditional music. Your transition points and things are based on your interpretation of the music. It's very beautiful music, but it's very difficult.
So what do they do for parades then, if they only play 2 minutes? Do they just switch off everybody?
What they do for parades is you play for 2-3 minutes, whatever your songs are, and it doesn't take you long to recover in between songs. So everyone stops, and you march another 100 yards or so, and then you start in with the next one. If you look at college marching bands, you don't see the individual players all playing continuously during that. No way. Half of them are so winded by the time they run out onto the field that it's only the ones that are in really good shape that play that first song anyway.
To sign up our program, could you play Bluebells of Scotland one more time?
Sure.
All right.